Welcome back to this week's episode of Unlocked. You guys know, if you've been watching, I have had a lot of people on when it comes to the criminal justice side of things, people who have been wronged or people who are looking to make a difference. I had on Alice Marie Johnson. Many know her because she was actually pardoned by President Trump. And then I had Jamal Truelove on. He ended up suing the city of San Francisco or the police department and ended up with a huge, massive settlement, I think upwards of $15 million because he was wrongfully convicted. And now, today, I'm super excited about this one because it hits really close to home and you will figure out why. So I have on Victor Hill with me. Hello.
How are you, Savannah?
Good. Former Clayton County
Sheriff.
Former Clayton County Sheriff. And what a freaking story. I remember hearing your story back on the news, and then it wasn't until it came full circle that we realized you had the same federal judge on your case that we had on ours.
I did. And
reading your book, which people can find it. You can go online, Amazon, wherever, order it. I was in shock. By the whole thing. Just the treatment of you. I mean, I say I was in shock, but heck, the exact same thing happened to us at resentencing that happened to you in this book. But before we go into all of that, how long were you police chief in Clayton County?
I was the sheriff for 14 years.
Okay, sheriff. I keep getting it.
No problem.
So you were the sheriff for 14 years. And how was that? I mean, when I was looking at videos, I was kind of doing some research. People looked at you as the savior of Clayton County because the crime rates went down. You were a very tough on crime sheriff.
I was.
And so what was that? How was your time there?
It was great. You know, I had a great relationship with the community. I had a very, I would call it an elite team that made things happen that we were able to put together. And we did some things that were very groundbreaking as far as crime fighting is concerned. Mm-hmm. I had political enemies that was trying to unseat me. And of course, they couldn't unseat me at the polls. Yeah. So twice, with this time succeeding through lying to grand juries and doing other things that I'll talk about that's in the book, they were able to use the system to get me out of office. Mm. And let me say this. So let me tell you how this came to be. I have a best friend and his family. They're big fans of you and the show. And when what happened at your sentencing happened, they got in touch with me and told me, you might want to look at this and y'all two may need to meet because they saw the similarities there. Well, I'd heard of the Chrisleys, but being honest, I never watched it, so I started doing research. And I saw I missed out on a lot of fun, especially Nana Faye. I need to meet her, by the way.
Hey, she is an angel. She has been a lifesaver.
But as I started researching, let me tell you the similarities. First, I want to tell you one thing that I saw, and I write about it when I autographed the book to you, is this. One thing that I really admire is I think any parent would be proud to have a daughter that would fight for them the way you have fought for your family and continue to do so. You know, the Bible says, honor thy father and thy mother. There's no escape clause there.
No.
It doesn't say honor them only if they don't get indicted or honor them. It says honor thy father and thy mother. And it's very, very rare. And I think any parent would love to have a daughter as loyal as you and that would fight to the end for them. And that's to be admired. But let me say this too. You know, as I studied the case and I studied you and what you were doing, what really caused me to reach out to you is I saw a lot of comments that really disturbed me that I thought was very hurtful because I saw a young lady fighting for her father and mother, which you're supposed to do. And a lot of people act as if though what you were saying is far-fetched and like, well, this can't be true and that you're spoiled, you're rich or whatever like that. And there were so many similarities. I said, you know, I would like to go and corroborate a lot of what you're saying because it's not far-fetched. What happened to your family has actually happened to me twice.
That's what people don't realize.
Absolutely. The first time it happened, I was running to take the seat back again, and I was indicted on a 37-count RICO charge. Now, think about this. RICO is something that's used for the mob.
you're going to prison for life if convicted of that.
Exactly. And when those RICO charges came out, what a lot of people didn't know and what the media refused to put out was what the RICO charges was about. These charges, 27 of them alleged that I drove my assigned police car out of town, and they said that every time I put gas in it, that was a RICO charge, so they made it a felony. And they said that by doing this, I was running a criminal organization or a criminal enterprise. We know that's ridiculous. The sheriff has to have his car 24/7.
Yeah.
If my deputies, God forbid, kill someone or get killed, or something major happens, I have to get back. I'm authorized to buy a plane ticket back anyway, which would cost a whole lot more money. So that's why I was indicted. Well, guess who was one of the lead investigators in that case against me?
Yeah.
A guy named Josh Waits. And at that time...
Who, if people have listened to my podcast, you know that name. If you listen to my dad's podcast, you know that name all too well. And if not, go back some episodes. Maybe we can tag it in this episode to tell you where to go and hear it. But you'll hear the story behind it.
Absolutely. So Josh Waits was working at the sheriff's office at that time. And they didn't want me to come back and assume being sheriff again. So that particular sheriff gave the order, find anything you can on him to see if they could stop me from coming back. So allegedly, they cranked up a special purpose grand jury saying that they were looking at corruption while I was in office. Well, when we do an open records request through discovery, discovery would be more likely, we see all these logs that I'm being followed. We also see logs and video where Josh Waits is going through my trash can. Now think about it, I'm out of office 3 years. If I was corrupt while I was in office, what could you find in my trash can 3 years later?
Exactly.
That would cause, so it proved that they were looking for anything and they were trying to come up with anything they could. Well, anyway.
Well, there's no difference in our case than them doing, running a, FinCEN report.
Exactly.
That is for money laundering, terrorism, or sex trafficking, I want to say.
Wow.
The only time you can run it.
Exactly.
Is for those things. And so they created a false case report.
Exactly.
So they could have a case number to then run it. And then the moment they ran it, they shut it all down.
Exactly what they did in this case. They were running tag numbers of anyone I went to visit. If I went on a date, they ran her tag number. You know, and even when I reported that to the GBI, they said, well, it's because of an investigation. Well, what was the investigation for? I mean, I actually had video footage of me campaigning at an MLK parade.
Yeah.
What would that have to do with corruption while I was a sheriff? It was very obvious what it was about. Well, we go to trial. The trial's in Clayton County. Of course, I have an intimate relationship with the citizens of Clayton County, and they saw through it, and they didn't buy it, and I was acquitted on all charges. Well, Josh Waits, once I become sheriff, knows he can't be there. So he leaves, and what does he does? Somehow he becomes the chief of the Georgia Revenue.
Georgia Department of Revenue. He was within
a colossal mistake.
Beyond, because he was in charge of their, special investigations, something. He was in charge of all the COAM cases, all that you saw him on the news, just raiding everything. He would call WSB TV, notify them that he was about to make a raid so they could show up, take the photos of him looking big, bad, whatever it may be. And he prided himself on destroying people's lives and not on the truth. And that was the crazy part was, like I said, the OIG opened up an investigation and sided with us on about 80% of our claims.
And he wasn't just destroying people's lives. He had a particular target group he was looking for. There's a chapter in my book is called The Press, the Prosecutors, and the Robert Ford Syndrome. And Waits suffered greatly from the Robert Ford Syndrome, and a lot of other people we're about to discuss did as well, too. So what is the Robert Ford Syndrome? Well, to know that, you got to understand who Robert Ford is, and most people don't know and don't care, and that's the problem. Robert Ford is the man that shot and killed Jesse James. He shot him in the back because he knew he couldn't face him and probably won the gunfight for real. Well, it's an interesting study because he was a fan of Jesse James, according to some historians, but he thought that if I killed this man, then I would assume his accolades, his legend, or whatever. And of course, that didn't turn out to be the case. Most people don't remember who he is. On his tombstone, it says, "Here lies the man that shot and killed Jesse James." I've never seen another man's name on a person's tombstone. Well, fast forward to Josh Waits. Josh Waits and people like him in the judicial system believe that if they target high-profile people, celebrities, cops, politicians, that's their claim to fame. That's their way to get a 15-second press conference. Well, I take that back. Probably a 15-minute
Literally.
Exactly.
Well, that's why you had what you're describing is in the OIG report, you've got text messages from Josh Waite's phone, and he raids this warehouse where all this furniture is of my parents. They're going to seize all the furniture. Okay. And he did it illegally, went in with a search warrant that was never even signed off on by a judge, threatened the owner of the warehouse he was going to arrest her if she didn't give him access. And then he goes in and he sits on a chair that was on the show, and he takes a photo of my dad on the chair, sitting like this. And then Josh takes a photo of himself sitting on the chair in the exact same manner, and sends it bragging, saying, look at me in Todd's chair.
Exactly.
Like someone who is so desperate for fame or notoriety. It's crazy how all of it happens.
It is. So one thing I want to say is this, I'm not here to give an opinion on guilt or innocence, but let me say this on your behalf and behalf of your family. Anything initiated by Josh Waite is suspect. I wouldn't believe any case he puts together.
Well, he lied.
Exactly.
On his job application.
Absolutely.
He doesn't have a college degree from the college he states he does.
Absolutely.
So every case he's ever worked on should be reopened and relooked at, because he had huge Fourth Amendment violations. You name it, he did it.
There was a guy that Josh Waite used in my first case named Jonathan Newton, and he was used to lie in that investigation as well. And they got something in common. There's both no proof of them having college degrees, but this guy was used to lie in my first case. And then years later, this case comes up. The same people are involved, the same people involved in this, and he pops up again, and now he's soliciting witnesses. And interestingly, he pops up in law school and takes a bar exam, but there's no proof that he ever went to have a bachelor's degree. So it's kind of like Jonathan Newton and Josh Waite are cousins in that regard. And anything, like I said, anything involving those two is suspect. So that's why when I read comments and people don't believe you and they're like, okay, oh my God, they're guilty. Don't be so fast to think that just because a jury convicted someone that person is guilty.
Life is a journey, one step at a time. From running errands to taking care of the family, your feet deserve to feel as good as your spirit. That's where G-Defy shoes come in. With G-Defy's patented Verso Shock technology, G-Defy absorbs harmful bumps and impact, just like a gentle cushion for your soul. Plus, all G-Defy shoes come with 2 free orthotics. Comfort and support should feel like a blessing. I've been on the go non-stop, and I am so ready for my schedule to just slow down, and I'm ready for a little bit of a break. When I don't have my heels on, I have my G-Defy shoes on. They literally help just revive my feet, my soul, my life, and I can be on my feet all day long without having a single complaint with G-Defy. So visit gdefy.com today. That's GDEFY.com and use code UNLOCKED for $20 off your first pair, because walking in comfort is a grace that we all need. That's gdefy.com and use code UNLOCKED for $20 off your first pair. And that's what I tell people is 1 in 20 criminal cases result in a wrongful conviction. I would argue that it's more than that. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I would think it would be more.
I would argue that it's more than that, but the studies that are out there show it's 1 in 20.
And remember this, you can lie by omission as well as commission. It's not just the lies that are told to grand juries. It's not just the lies that are told to juries, but it's what's not said to them. Like there's a thing called motion in limine. There was a lot of things that we weren't allowed to present at my trial.
So
that I think if a jury heard that, there would have never been a conviction in my case.
100%. With us at trial, first off, all the so-called evidence that the government obtained illegally, a magistrate judge ruled it was not allowed in at trial. So it's not allowed in. Good luck. That was 90% of what they say was their evidence.
Absolutely.
We get to trial. Judge Ross allows all the evidence in. She says it's all coming in. That's my final ruling. And then they prohibited us from speaking about the state case. So,
I was prohibited from talking about my state case.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so, but if we could have spoken about the state case and all the illegal misconduct that led to the federal case, and the state working with the feds and their backdoor meetings and the text messages to where Josh Waits is telling a family member, your parents are going to need a much different lawyer than what they're used to. We're having a meeting with the feds come Tuesday.
See, that's another similarity. The same people that initiated this RICO case against me initiated this case with the feds. There was this other guy that worked close with Josh Waits named Dennis Baker. That's a whole nother character we could have a show on. And he was basically the lead investigator in this federal. He was on the FBI task force. Mm-hmm. So the DA and I, is no secret, are political enemies. She supported other political candidates against me. And then if you look at the history, the story behind the case of what I went to prison for, it started over a political campaign. See, here's what a lot of people don't realize about these cases. Okay, I was indicted and ultimately wrongfully committed for allegedly violating 6 inmates' constitutional rights.
Yeah, that's what I was wanting to go back to, is when people research you, they're going to see, because when you see these news outlets report on it, it's some disturbing information of saying, all right, he violated their constitutional rights. They caused bodily harm. Look at their wrist. Look at where they were restrained in a chair for 6 hours. They're going to see these things. So what is your response to that?
I'm glad you said that. Well, first of all, you put out things that are false. So now you're trying to case in the media before you can even get to trial, which is something we really need to fix. It's like, I think there's a documentary on it called Trial by Media. But here's what a lot of people don't know, and here's what we weren't allowed to tell the media. 6 people didn't go to the FBI and said, I was in a restraint chair, please help me. That didn't happen. The restraint chair was used a total of 630 times. I'm responsible for its use 9 or 10 times. All of the other 620 times was used by my staff, various members, lieutenants, officers, whatever. Okay, these people were solicited. They were contacted. What they did was they came and they said, okay, show us every report where he authorized the use of the chair. So they weren't interested in the other 620 times. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So then you contact people who are known criminals, people who are out there tearing up officers' yards, running women off the road, beating old ladies in a store, and you tell them, hey, you're a victim. One of them was still in my jail for beating up an 80-year-old woman in a wheelchair and her daughter in a grocery store. And they came and got him out of the jail, brought him up to the DA's office, who initiated this. And this is what was said, because one of my deputies was there. Hey, here's a picture. Is this you? Were you in the restraint chair?
And who
yes.
was the DA at the time?
Tasha Mosley. Okay. And still is the DA, unfortunately.
Okay.
So then they asked him, were you in a restraint chair? Yes. Did you feel any pain? Yes. Okay, that's all we need. Remember, so let me backtrack a little. So first, you contact people and you tell them they're victims. We never had a lawsuit or a complaint about our use of the restraint chair. Never. The lawsuits didn't start until they came in to me with this ham sandwich indictment. And then suddenly it became the new law that a person can't go in a restraint chair unless they're uncontrollably violent at the time they're put in a chair, which we know that's not the case. If you look at all 600 cases, none of them were uncontrollably violent when they were put in a chair. If that was the case, probably no one could get in a chair because it's hard to put an uncontrollably violent person in a chair.
Yes.
Right. So you solicit these victims. And of course, if a person finds out I'm going to get my charges dropped and I can possibly get some money, what do you think they're going to do?
You've got a government agency telling someone, hey, you're a victim.
Right. They didn't say they were a victim.
Instead of someone coming forward and saying, I'm a victim.
Right. And that's the one thing people don't realize about this case. And they also don't realize it was initiated out of a political campaign. A deputy that had to fire and arrest for stealing guns, for filing false reports, who he and his wife were friends with the DA. One of his campaign workers, who's a person who's been in a restraint chair several times, and rightfully so, they used him as a complaint. But I was never indicted for him. Why? Because if they actually used him, it would show it started from a political campaign. Yeah. So that never happened. So now let's go to other connection. So the 242 code is very, very broad. It's a civil rights code, and usually is used for severe cases like what happened with George Floyd. I'm charged with the same thing that the officer that put his knee on the neck of George Floyd and killed him is charged with. And because it's such a broad code, the Supreme Court has ruled that when you charge somebody with that, whatever you charge them for has to be clearly established that it's against the law. So nowhere in the country had anybody been even sued for what I was criminally prosecuted for. So there was nothing clearly established out there. Let me give you a good example. Tennessee versus Garner is a very famous case. A 15-year-old was breaking into a house, and as he ran away, the police shot and killed him. Well, at that time in history, the police was taught that they could shoot a fleeing felon.
Yeah.
Well, those officers weren't indicted and sent to prison. It was a civil matter that went up to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court said from this moment on, you can only shoot a fleeing felon if he poses a threat to the lives of people while he's fleeing. Because if you could just shoot a fleeing felon, you could shoot somebody for tax evasion.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, then you fast forward to 2015, and in my hometown where I was a cop before I moved to Atlanta, you got a gentleman, I believe his name was Walter Scott. He runs from the police, and he shot in the back and killed just for running, and that officer serving time for murder. At that time, it was clearly established that you can't do this.
Exactly.
Well, fast forward to my case. There is no precedent. There is no other case. Even Judge Ross admitted at my sentencing, this is a novel case. I've never even seen a civil prosecution prior to this. Well, then how do you explain that when my attorneys filed the motion to have this case dismissed and cited 2 recent Supreme Court rulings that said that you can't do that, how do you explain that she refused to dismiss it? Well, here's how you explain it. If you look at the connections, Judge Ross is friends with the DA who brought this against me.
Yep.
Judge Ross' husband used to work for that DA in that DA's office. Judge Ross is Facebook friends with one of my political opponents. And then you begin to see what I call incestuous relationships, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And
then you get an idea of why this was totally thrown out. In this case, even though it never happened before, it may never happen before, but we're going to change the rules, and you're going to go to prison for it and be criminally prosecuted, and we're going to skip the civil context. But we haven't skipped the civil context when people were actually killed.
I can't help but scroll through my social media pages recently and see all these celebrities who have lost so much weight, and I think to myself, how in the living you know what did they do this? The answer to that would be GLP-1s, guys. I've got a secret for you. You don't have to be rich and famous in order to get access to these medications. Through hers, you can get an affordable weight loss program personalized just for you. Weight loss solutions are not one size fits all. Everyone deserves to have a weight loss plan that is tailored to their specific needs. So if you're struggling with losing weight and need some extra help, it's time you check out hers. Hers is changing women's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable weight loss treatment. And their holistic program gives you access to personalized solutions like GLP-1 weekly injections that have the same active ingredients as Ozempic and Wegovy and oral medication kits. Hers connects you with a medical provider who will create a personalized treatment plan tailored to your needs. And if prescribed, you'll get the medication as part of a doctor-developed weight loss program, including ongoing care and online support at no additional cost. Through hers, weight loss plans are more affordable, with compounded GLP-1 injections starting at only $199 per month with a 12-month subscription paid up front. No hidden fees and no membership fees. Plus, your personalized treatment ships for free directly to your door. So if you've been struggling with your weight loss journey, it's time you find the best option that works for you with hers. Start your free online visit today at forhers.com/Savannah. That's forhers.com/Savannah for your personalized weight loss treatment options. Forhers.com/Savannah. Hers weight loss is not available everywhere. Compounded products are not FDA approved or verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required and restrictions apply. Wegovy and Ozempic are not compounded. This episode of Unlocked is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey to all my podcast listeners, whether you love true crime, comedies, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call all the shots on your auto insurance too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now, that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to choose the best option for you, and fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, price and coverage match, limited by state law. There was part of your book where you talk about the judge assignment. Mm-hmm. And just to put it out there as clear as day for people, it states, once we found out who the judge was assigned to my case, the incestuous relationships in my case became clearer. A friend of mine researched Judge Eleanor Ross and contacted me with concerns. First, her husband was an assistant prosecutor with the Clayton County DA's office at the time they attempted to prosecute me for allegedly violating the RICO Act by driving my assigned vehicle out of town. And second, she also had a friendship with Tasha Mosley. Even more interesting was that she was Facebook friends with one of my longtime political opponents. This would later explain why, no matter what legal issues were about to be raised about the validity of the case, it would fall mute on deaf ears.
Absolutely.
And that was we saw a lot of similarities in ours, to the point of our lawyers would say, we want to ask for such and such. And she said, go ahead and, lay your groundwork, or let's hear your argument. But chances are I'm going to deny it.
It gets even better.
So before even hearing anything, I'm going to deny it, but go ahead.
Well, it gets even better when we talk about similarities. There was a holdout juror. The jury deliberated for 4 days in my case, and there was a holdout juror that saw through it and obviously was very, very reluctant about convicting me of this. And he was called out twice, which no one has ever seen in the history of federal court. And you got to understand, he's not just called out. It's a high-profile case, so he's called out in front of the media and everybody else. And this man literally said that other jurors were yelling at him and screaming at him and calling him names.
Yep.
And at that point, I believe any other judge would have called a mistrial. But because of the relationships and because of the personal nature, which is a case where she really should have recused herself from, the mistrial was never called. So imagine you're in a room and the majority of the people are yelling and screaming at you and calling you names. You get called out in front of the media twice. And here's another interesting thing that happened in a case that my attorney said they'd never seen. At one point, she addressed the media and she said, I know y'all want me to take him off, but I can't. It was almost as if though she was saying, hey, I know y'all want his head, but I can't give you his head right now. We're working hard on it.
Yeah.
Never seen anything like it.
No, I mean, even in ours, when it comes to the jury, she had read them. First off, this was a month-long trial, 4 or 6 weeks, however long the trial was. And then once she read them, the jury instructions, and she was sending him out of the room, there was one juror, and she said, she called her up to, her podium, I guess, and said, I've noticed you've had a hard time staying awake during this trial. And this was a juror who was audibly in our favor. When the prosecutors were, interviewing their witnesses, when our people were interviewing their witnesses and we caught them in lies, this juror was audibly making noises or slapping her book or whatever it may have been. And Judge Ross said, I noticed you've had a hard time staying awake. And this juror goes, no, ma'am, the TVs are on the ground, where, the exhibits are placed. The exhibits are placed for us to see them on these TVs, and they're on the ground. And she said, so no, I wasn't asleep. And the judge said, well, to my knowledge, it looks like you've had a hard time staying awake, so I'm recusing you. And she could have done that throughout the whole trial. If you noticed someone was having a hard time staying awake through a 4-week trial, you would have thought she would have sent her home sooner. So that was a big one for us. And then once our investigators interviewed the jurors after trial, one of them stated that the women were constantly yelling at him. He was I want to say he was one of the only Trump supporters on the jury. And these other women were yelling at him. I'm ready to get home. I have a baby shower to get to. You need to find them guilty, but all these things. And so he held out to the very end and then finally said, I was tired of all of them yelling at me and I just had to do it.
So that's another similarity in the case. You know, imagine you're at trial and you're supposed to get a unanimous, but you have someone that has doubt in their mind and they're supposed to. And then they're not only being pressured, but they're also being pressured by the judge as well. That's what happened in my case as well, too.
Well, in your book, you say, despite all these facts, I testified to the jury being deadlocked for 4 days. Judge Ross would do everything in her power to coerce a guilty verdict. The foreman of the jury began sending a series of inflammatory notes, singling out a juror because he would not vote to convict me. The forewoman began accusing the juror of everything possible to get the judge to remove the juror. Judge Ross called out this juror in front of everyone, including the press, to inquire if he was cognitively impaired based on the forewoman's notes. It turned out he was not, and articulated how he was considering the willful intent part of the law I was being charged with. The juror also described how he was being yelled at and called names by his fellow jurors. This alone should have caused the judge to declare a mistrial, but she would do nothing of the sort. Judge Ross was visibly upset at the possibility of having to declare a mistrial. This would become even more obvious when she did something never seen in the 11th Circuit or any other circuit. Perhaps the craziest thing in my trial was when Judge Ross began speaking directly to the media, sitting in the audience after bringing out the juror, who was identified in front of the world as the holdout juror. She told them she knew they wanted this juror kicked off, but she could not find a lawful reason to do so at the time. Judge Ross knew the press wanted my head and was trying to assure them that she was working diligently to give it to them. The media has untold perceived power over elected and appointed officials who want to be praised by them on the 6 o'clock news, hoping to build a name for themselves.
Very true.
Her actions got even more bizarre when she called the juror out again for a second time to question him again in front of the press before sending him back into a situation the holdout juror had already described as volatile because of the jurors who were yelling at him and calling him names. There is no record of this ever being done before and was unprecedented. Judge Ross had too much invested in the case to please her friends and media, who were counting on her to get a conviction. On the final day of deliberation, Lindsay Barron, my volunteer pro bono attorney, found a case in the 11th Circuit that was almost identical to what was happening in my trial, where the judge knew the jury split and allowed the trial to go forward without declaring a mistrial. Judge Ross acted if she was not aware of the motion sent by email and disregarded it, determined to coerce a verdict. Judge Ross was unable to hide her personal bias and feelings in this case. This is the craziest part to me. Mm-hmm. When Ross insisted on charging the jury a second time, she misread the charge at the part where it said, if there's any reasonable doubt, I should be found not guilty. And instead, she said, I should be found guilty. I will never forget the emphasis she put on the word guilty when she misread the charge to the jury.
I'm glad you're stopping right there. You said something that's very brilliant that a lot of people don't understand when I was researching you and getting to know more about you. You know, federal court don't allow cameras there. Mm-hmm.
And they should.
And they should. And
they should.
And there's a person that types the transcript. So
it can be altered.
Right. Or they could maybe make a mistake. It should be taped. And I wish it was taped, because if people could hear the emphasis that she put on the word guilty, you know,
she has a way of doing that.
Right. It wasn't just read wrong. It was the way it was read too. And you had to be there to hear it. You know, my best friend who attended the whole trial, who's a fan of yours, by the way, he heard it. He was shocked. And we both agreed there was an emphasis put on it. But then the bizarreness didn't stop then. Then you got Hal Steakhouse. You might want to read that.
I want to read that part.
Yeah.
Let's see. Where does that one come out?
It's right at the end of that chapter, and it says Hal Steakhouse.
Okay. Which they opened one here in Nashville.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a great steak, by the way.
I need to go.
And the seafood is great, too.
Is this on the sentencing part?
Yeah. Well, I think, no, it comes after sentencing, actually. And, of course, we got to discuss sentencing because that was very bizarre.
Okay.
Maybe we'll save Hal Steakhouse for last.
Yeah, let's
go
do
with
the sentencing part.
Right.
So, March 14th, 2023, which that was your sentencing. I'm trying to just put the timing together because our trial was it started on Grayson's, 16th birthday or 17th birthday? I guess he just turned 18. So it started on his 16th birthday. So 2022, May 16th was trial. They were sentenced in November, then reported January of 2023. Mm-hmm. So your sentencing, March 14th, 2023, was the date for my sentencing. When I arrived, the parking lot was full of reporters as usual. Nothing had changed my policy of ignoring the media, and this was my last appearance at court to enjoy doing so. My brother had flown in to be present with me. We resemble each other, so the press focused the cameras on him, not knowing it wasn't me. That was hilarious. Can we talk about, as one of my favorite people likes to say, the fake media I just love when they get it so wrong. It gives me such joy, like the fact that they're focusing a camera on someone that's not even you. But I'll proceed. I already knew the judge was going to put on a show for the media so she could get the 15 seconds of fame she fought so hard for, I can agree, by coercing a verdict. Plus, I knew she was mad about me continuing to influence the sheriff's race to throw a monkey wrench in their plot to get me out, to get their man in. So it was possible she was likely to retaliate by giving me more time. I love the word retaliate. But I would never have guessed in a million years she would admit this on the record. Before I directly quote what Judge Ross said to me from the court transcripts just before she sentenced me to 18 months in prison, let me quote the code of conduct for all United States judges, which is crazy that you and I talked about this before I came on. Before we got in contact, I quoted some of the exact same things she quoted
I saw the show when I was researching you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So let me quote the Code of Conduct for all United States judges. The Code of Conduct says, judges may not hear cases in which they have either personal knowledge of the disputed facts, a personal bias concerning a party to the case, earlier involvement in the case as a lawyer, or a financial interest in any party or subject matter of this case. Think about this code of ethics as I quote directly from the court's transcripts what Judge Ross said during my sentencing hearing. Judge Ross said, the convictions for which we are dealing with in this case are pretty novel. I don't know if any of us have seen a prosecution, let alone a conviction, related to the use of a restraint chair. And in fact, I am not aware of any civil lawsuits on that basis, either except for the ones now pending on Mr. Hill. It's truly amazing the judge came right out and admitted this was a novel case of first impression, and she was not aware of any case law that said what I did was wrong. We must then ask, if this was the result of her legal research, why did she not dismiss the case when this fact was brought to her attention in a motion to dismiss filed by Attorney Barron? Her statement confirmed very clearly that it was a case that should have never gone before a jury, according to case law. But it did, and it was forced through by jury coercion. I've also considered, and this is Judge Ross stating, I have also considered that this type of prosecution let me start over. I have also considered that this type of prosecution is in this course estimate. She's always so wordy in the way that she says stuff. She could land the plane eventually. I've also considered that this type of prosecution is in this course estimation novel at best, best and that this type of charge does not often involve violence, assault of behavior, such as beating, tasing, shooting, etc., or unlawful arrest, none of which is involved here. Most of the time, when cops are charged with felony color of law cases, we see it in cases like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. I never touched, injured, or killed anyone, as in those cases. The statute states, if there is no serious injury, it is a misdemeanor. However, they needed a felony conviction to remove me from office and successfully ham sandwich it through the grand jury process. Ross insisted on sending me to prison to please the press and her political friends. Let me start by saying that I have truly struggled with this case. I've heard that a gazillion times. There's been a lot of thought and contemplation, and because of the woman I am, I did a lot of prayer in this case, not because it's high profile. I'm a praying man too, but what happened to the separation of church and state? Also, if the case being high profile was not an issue, then why bring it up? Exactly. We've said the same thing.
Absolutely.
I struggled with this case because, as we've already discussed, it is such a novel one. This was another slip because, as we discussed, if she knew it was a novel case that had never been prosecuted before, why did she allow the case to go forward knowing it was a case of first impression with no case law to support that what I did was a crime? And one thing I've come to realize, especially over the past year or so, is that everybody has a Victor Hill opinion. Based on the facts that Judge Ross is Facebook friends with one of my political opponents and friends with the Clayton County DA who brought this case to the U.S. Attorney, she obviously already had a Victor Hill opinion as well. I've had to shut people down. Many people who know I'm assigned to this case wanted to come talk about Victor Hill, and I've had to say, no, it's not appropriate. I can't talk to you. I don't want to hear your opinion. But it seems like those opinions are always at one extreme or another. You're either a hero or a villain to many people. There really is not any gray area when it comes to that. I must ask and wonder, how did she get to know that I'm either a hero or a villain to so many people if she shut them all down, telling them no because listening to them is inappropriate? But what I say to everyone who has an interest at all in this case is that although I can generally consider some character evidence, I'm not here to punish Victor Hill for everything he's done. Everything I've done, what exactly is everything
I've done?
Yes. Did the judge just assume I'm guilty of everything anyone has ever accused me of?
Absolutely.
People have sent me letters about all the people he terminated from the sheriff's office. One of those people being Josh Waits.
And let me add this. 98% of the witnesses who weren't people who I arrested or people who I had to deal with in jail were people I terminated. Mm-hmm. They just lined up everyone I terminated and brought them. Some of them who were part of a scam to steal $1.2 million from the sheriff's office in overtime. Some of them had actually put people in a safety restraint chair for the same reasons I did, but suddenly they became witnesses. Yeah. Keep going.
And this is something I also find very interesting. To go back to her quote, people have sent me letters about all the stuff, about all the people he terminated from the sheriff's office. I even got a flash drive of the 911 call involving a woman and the shooting in Gwinnett County. I'm not here for any of that stuff. Why did she bring it up if she is not here for
any of that stuff, right?
And why are you bringing up something that has nothing to do with the case that's at hand?
Absolutely.
That's crazy. Absolutely. But I love what you said in this is, why did Judge Ross bring any of that stuff up if it had nothing to do with her decision? The fact is, the fact she brought up any of that stuff made it obvious that she was there for all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
Who gave her a flash drive and how did they get it to her? I don't mind telling you that based on your trial testimony, and also, even though it's not a part of this record, some of your social media activity that I've seen since you got convicted, I'm not sure whether or not you've learned your lesson fully in this case. I know you're keeping your hands involved in the selection of the next sheriff. That was in her own words.
Yes.
Why was Judge Ross reading my social media? If you guys...
The same reason she's watching your show.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. That's exactly what I was saying was, she brought up social media, podcasts, TV shows during mom's resentencing. But why was Judge Ross reading my social media? If it is not a part of the record, why was it a part of my sentencing? What offended her about it? Was it my support of another candidate that she did not approve? Then came this added measure to my probation from the judge, and I quote, "Additionally, and I need you to understand this clearly pursuant to 18 U.S.C. section 3653B, you must refrain from engaging in the occupation business or professional law enforcement, including as a consultant. That means that if the next sheriff of Clayton County is someone closely associated with you, hypothetically, who wants to offer you a position as a civilian to circumvent your lack of post-certification, you would not be able to accept it. You will not be permitted to work in that capacity. And like you, I know many people. I have big ears. I will bring you into this courtroom and hold a supervised release hearing for this court to determine whether you've been working in such a law enforcement capacity." Who said I had big ears?
Yeah, who said I had big ears? Right.
Was it the people she said she couldn't talk to? Also, does the many people she knows include the DA, Tasha Mosley, and Chairman Jeff Turner, who was announced he is running for sheriff after my wrongful conviction? That whole
true story.
That whole sentencing transcript was nothing but her using ex parte information, interviews, conversations to convict you.
Absolutely.
Or to sentence you to 18 months.
Absolutely.
And again, I would like to say that I'm shocked, but I'm not, because I saw it firsthand. And again, for people who go listen to my solo episode where I spoke about the resentencing, to where the judge literally looked at me, like you said, it's how she says things and the tone in her voice, the inflection, it was literally like she was looking down the barrel of a gun during this sentencing hearing. And I'm sitting, in her courtroom, you've got the seats that are like pew seating. I was in that first pew of seating on the very end. So I'm in direct line with her. She looks straight down and says, "And to the person who has these children in their custody, I hope you would be more concerned with these children's well-being than you are spreading false narrative for ratings on a TV show or podcast."
Ratings that she's contributing to if she's watching.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that's what was so crazy to me. And then proceeded to give my mom 2 more years of probation. When she was ordered by an appeals court, we couldn't use the evidence. We couldn't find the evidence used to convict Julie in such and such bank fraud. You must resentence her.
I was given 6 years supervisory release, and my attorneys had to, well, they didn't necessarily have to appeal it, but they had to correct it that she couldn't do that. They said that maybe she got it confused when she was a state court judge, that the rules are different, and it had to be reduced to 3 years supervisory release. And, the retaliation is obvious.
When you do something she doesn't like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, to reference your show, to reference my social media, there may not be a federal law against that, but that can't fall under the codes of ethics. It's just not. And then, remember, we haven't got to the highlight yet. You got to go to Hell's Steakhouse.
Hold on, though. But I want to read, because the federal judge code of conduct states, let's see, their ethics policies. There was a few that I was like, pretty sure she's... I would also love to see her financial disclosures. I would love to see that. I'm just saying.
You get ready to get a job with the Georgia Department of Revenue.
Hey, right? Hey, hire me. Come on. So a judge should perform the duties of the office fairly, impartially, and diligently. Diligently means you take your time. You do not rush. You don't say in the middle of a trial, it's a holiday weekend, we're all ready to get home, so let's wrap this up. You don't say, I don't want to be here all day, So let's get this sentencing over with.
Yes.
You don't, and she was very much, she had her mind made up before she ever went in it. But with this is, as when you read your book, you're like, all right, it couldn't get any worse. Like,
you would think.
Like her conduct, her actions, things that are said, there's no way it could get any worse. And then we get to the house part of things, which I was just in shock by. For anyone that gets his book, you can find it on page 160 in the book. But I've got it, and I need glasses, y'all. Oh my God. So, House Steakhouse, the unprofessional statements. So, once you were sentenced, you were probably just like, the hell with it, I'm going to have a nice dinner.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Trust me, people don't realize that is the most traumatic moment.
Right.
And she could have, did she make any comments about taking you in custody that day, or was it? No, she did not. It was set for a particular. Well, no, she didn't set it that day, but they give you a date to turn yourself in. Well, sometimes she will take you immediately, or she made it very known during Mom's resentencing, I could have taken you that day, but I chose, as a woman of faith, to, give you more time, whatever it may be. But the unprofessional statements and behavior of Judge Ross did not end at the sentencing. After sentencing that evening, I went to have dinner with my best friend at House Steakhouse. When we walked in, we were seated upstairs and joined by a couple of attorneys who flew in from New York to weigh in on my appeal. When we sat down at the table, within 3 to 4 minutes, I saw the silhouette of a woman walking up to the table in my peripheral vision. I immediately stood up to greet the lady to see who she was and what she wanted. To my surprise, and the surprise of everyone seated at my table, it was Judge Ross. She said she just wanted to come over and say hi, giving me a smug smile, and left. Most judges would not approach anyone that they had just sentenced earlier that day in a public setting, not just for security reasons, but ethically and professionally. It is an odd position for both the judge and the person that they sentenced. What if I wanted to express my disdain for her unethical behavior and connections to my political enemies? It was very inappropriate, to say the least, and I don't know why any judge I don't know any judge who would think her coming up to my table after sentencing me was a good idea. A kangaroo court indeed.
Let me add something to that. If I am this vigilante sheriff that they tried to make me out to be, which is why the book is called Vigilante Sheriff. Yeah. And of course, after the facts are presented, it's asked, you be the judge. Am I vigilante, or is this, or the vigilantes really people like Josh Waits and people like these people in the legal system that misuse it in order to satisfy political objectives or satisfy the Robert Ford syndrome or whatever. But let's just think about this. If I truly was this big, bad, evil sheriff that was torturing people, why would you want to come up and tell me hi? If I'm capable of doing the stuff that I was falsely accused of, what if I became violent at that moment? Mm-hmm. I'm not even sure.
Clearly, she did not see you or find you as a threat.
Absolutely. Any
ethical judge would have, in my opinion, if she walked in and saw you, she should have gone the other way. Any judge I know would even potentially leave the restaurant and go elsewhere in a vicinity to where there's thousands of restaurants that she could have gone to.
Well, if you know anything about House, upstairs is a pretty large area. And when I watched her go back to her table, she was pretty far away. So she could have stayed and enjoyed her dinner, and I could have enjoyed mine. And if we saw each other, we could just ignore each other.
Yes.
It's not like I haven't been places and haven't seen people I arrested before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm certainly not going to go up to them, and they don't come up to me. We just kind of move on our way. Now, every now and then someone would come up and say something, because I don't put false charges on people.
Yeah.
So no one would have any reason to say anything like that. I had some people actually thank me and say, hey,
for
look,
saving my life, because if I wouldn't have gone to jail, X, Y, and Z, 100%.
Or the way I ran in jail, because I ran it like a military boot camp. I've had people thank me and said, hey, look, the discipline helped. Or it was the only jail I couldn't get drugs in, which there was a whole lot of drugs in federal court. We may have to do a federal jail. We may have to do another one on that. Right. And I actually had a person thank me for that and say, you got me off drugs. I said, how did I do that? Well, that's the only jail I couldn't get drugs in. So I came off of it. So I may have had someone approach me in that manner, but they were someone that was in my jail. But to just sentence me for something that no one in the history of the country has ever been sentenced for, and to make the type of statements, and I didn't put in the book about the adjectives. I was referred to as being arrogant. And, that word is very interesting word of arrogant.
She used, I'm almost positive, I'll have to go back in the transcripts and look, but she called my parents arrogant, entitled, money hungry, didn't care about their children. I mean, she made some of the worst comments. Clearly you didn't care about your children when you were committing these crimes, so why should I care about them now? And then in our statements, in our letters for resentencing, in my letter, it was a very heartfelt letter. And I said, I can only imagine that you as a mother, all the big life moments for your children that you're attending. And, my mother's missing out on those. And how a child needs their parent, X, Y, and Z.
Of course.
And she literally used that letter at resentencing to state that my mother didn't care about us, because if she did, she wouldn't have done these things. And as a mother, she knows how important it is to protect your children, which my parents did. It was a very very inappropriate. And you want, in one breath, you want to say you're a woman of faith, and then in another breath, make comments such as this. So I just think her overall conduct is inappropriate. But what was going through your mind when Judge Ross came up? At first, you obviously didn't know who it. House is a very dark setting, so you didn't know who was coming up to you at first, correct?
I did not.
And when she came up, what was going through your mind?
When we sat down and we talked about it, first everybody was in shock. What was that about? And, she could say what she wanted. The spirit and manner in which it was done wasn't a positive thing. No. It's kind of like, hey, I just wanted to say, all right, okay.
You just saw me in a courtroom where you sentenced me to 18 months in prison.
And just said that I was arrogant. Let me just say this. Anytime a person refers to a person or a group of people as arrogant, it's usually suspect. Because what is the definition of arrogance anyway? I always thought it meant that you thought you were better than someone else. But I've noticed that anyone that's attained any level of success or notoriety is usually referred to as arrogant. But I think studies will show that people who usually refer to people as arrogant may well be indirectly referring to themselves, because to come up to that table, that was arrogance. Right.
That was arrogance.
Right.
And so when did you report to prison, and when did you come home?
I reported to prison May 18th, and then I got out
May 18th of 2023.
Right. And I got out in March.
Okay.
Right. Correct. I might be wrong on that. I think it's May 24th, and I think it's March 18th I got out. Right.
Okay.
Right.
And now are you on probation?
I'm on supervisory release.
Supervised release.
Absolutely.
And what are you not afraid of sitting down and doing this interview while still being under supervision?
Well, let me say this. I'm sitting in front of a very brave young woman. You've actually, for lack of a better term, got more balls than most men I know. Okay.
I love you for that.
No. The truth is the truth. You know what I'm saying? Anytime you should be afraid to speak the truth is that's bad.
Yeah.
Anytime the criminal justice system is used to imprison people we don't like, anytime it's used to, like in my case, to get me out of office in order to get another person in, that's not what the criminal justice system was designed for. You know, one day you and I are going to have to sit down and have a talk about the system. And, you know, it's not so much the system. I would never sit here and say that I think the DOJ is corrupt. I've never thought that. I think there are certain people in there that are corrupt and misuse the system. I don't think every federal judge is bad. Of course not. That would be like saying every cop
there's a few
bad.
Good ones.
Right. but when, but there
and I do call it the Department of Injustice, so that's where we're going to have some difference of opinion. But,
No problem. I like a good debate. But I think that there are certain people that they misuse the system. Let's take the grand jury, for instance. You know, my understanding is that there's only two countries left with grand juries, and that's the United States and Liberia. I could be wrong, but based on my limited research and one attorney I spoke to, I believe that's the case. Think about this. Anytime you can go in a room and present a case on somebody, and that person can't be there.
Argue it themselves.
Right. They can't have an attorney, and you can tell them anything you want. And we know for a fact they lied to the grand jury. There are things that on there that we could see that was presented in the paper of the indictment that were obvious lies. There's one part of my book that's called Urination of Lies. And everyone that was put in a restraint chair claimed that they urinated on themselves. Okay, let's think about this for a second. Where's the decontamination reports?
Yeah.
Where's the reports about them getting new uniforms? Because there's no way a man can urinate on himself.
And not get...
And we can't put somebody else in the chair because that would... infectious diseases and so forth. Okay, if they're checked every 15 minutes, which they were because it's logged, did you tell an officer I need to use the restroom and he said no? Well, where's that officer and why isn't he indicted? So it just simply never happened. So what the grand jury is used for by certain individuals, not all, not every DA is corrupt.
Yeah.
Okay, but certain DAs...
I'd say the majority in Georgia are.
Hey.
I mean, you got Fannie Willis, you got all these other ones.
Right, well... You know, but like I said, not all. But there are DAs that will lie to grand juries to get an indictment, especially if you're someone that they want to target, especially if you're a high profile or if they have something, an agenda, political or whatever. I'm a victim of that. And
it's
I guess,
just like they went and sought individuals out to tell them they were victims.
Absolutely.
That's grand jury is no different than that, of them saying, look, he did X, Y, and Z, and the most awful, heinous things he did, you should convict him. It's basically a mini trial without the defendant being able to defend themselves.
And that's why it's called a ham sandwich indictment. You can indict a ham sandwich. I mean, if you have the ham sandwich can't come in, he can't bring an attorney, so you could tell the grand jury that the ham sandwich is a serial murderer, and what proof do they have otherwise? So they indict. And those type of prosecutors, corrupt prosecutors, know that. So they use that to their advantages, and there's no check and balance that when they lie to grand juries, they're held accountable for it, because they should be held liable under the perjury statute. But a lot of things that are said to grand juries, we can't even get access to.
Yep.
So now a person has a felony charge, and a felony indictment rather. And they can do one or two things, and it's in the book, and it's a lot of what was inspired by the inmates. You know, one thing we didn't go over, the inmates asked me to write that book, and that book is dedicated to them. And there's a lot of things that they wanted to say that I wrote on their behalf. And you got to think about this. When you're able to use a grand jury like that, and people are facing those type of charges, it's almost like holding a plea gun to their head. And most people, 90% of people are going to plea because they're like, this is just too much to fight.
The federal government has, I want to say it's like a 98% conviction rate. And I want to say it's less than 5% actually go to trial.
Right.
Because they give this whole, well, if you go to trial, you can get 30 years, but if you plead out, you'll get, 2 years.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's in the book. The inmates wanted me to address that issue. You have a constitutional right to go to trial.
I believe that every case should have to go to trial, that we should not be able to offer plea deals, because if more cases went to trial, you would have less people charged because they don't necessarily have all the evidence it takes to get a conviction.
I agree. I believe that one or two things should happen. I don't even know. The grand jury process is almost like a star chamber. But if you're going to keep it, at least allow that person a chance to defend themselves, to hear what's being presented against them, and to counter things that are being said. Because a corrupt prosecutor can lie to a grand jury with no checks and balance. So that's why they say you can indict a ham sandwich. And that has to be corrected. And I think probably, if you're not going to do away with the grand jury process, at least give people due process there. How that's allowed to go on so long, I don't know. And then again, if a person wants to go to trial and you're telling him he can be in jail 5 years, but because he went to trial, he's not going to be in jail 30 years. That's punishment.
Well, and it's punishment for fighting the government. It's basically retaliation because I chose to go to trial and now you're going to retaliate against me by giving me more time. And in a court of law, you are not allowed to bring up any prior plea offerings.
Yeah, I saw that when I was researching you.
That's crazy.
Insane.
Is that just like you can't sit and say, how are you going to give them X amount of time when you offered them less time or whatever it may have been? Because at one point they offered mom 5 years. She went to trial and got 7. So she made out worse. Dad made out somewhat better because they offered him 15 and he got 12. So it was a weird, just how it all happened. It was so, and that's not even a plea deal. Let's be clear about that. A plea deal is significantly less time. And in their mind, like they said, we know what we've done. We know what we haven't done. We're not going to say we've done something when we haven't done it. So we're going to trial.
Let me add something to this, and this will probably be for another time because this is a whole nother conversation, but I think you've touched on this before. It's something that the inmates, that they said a lot about. One thing I can tell you as the former sheriff, jail is really designed to keep dangerous people away from people. Like if you've got a predator out there and we know if he's loose that he's going to prey on people sexually, violence or whatever like that, those people have to be locked up because if they're allowed to roam, someone can be raped, robbed or murdered. Yeah. And that's understandable. And unfortunately, we've gotten away from that and we're wasting a lot of money and time. A warden that I met when I was at a conference taught me something very early in my career as sheriff that I'll never forget, and I started implementing. He told me that when he took over the state system, he went and he visited all of the different institutions, and he went to a max for lifers. And when he got there was a lot of security, people with rifles on the roof. And he said when he got inside, there were people on dialysis, wheelchairs, walkers, or whatever. And he remembered asking, he said, why y'all have all this security? Yep. And they said, well, these guys are here for life. They murder or whatever. He said, well, how can they get out? And even if they got out, where are they going to go for dialysis and how are they going to run on a walker or a wheelchair? And he said at that point he realized at a certain point we're running a convalescence home.
Amen.
Right. There are certain crimes that I hope one day that we're able to address as a nation because, let's say there is hypothetically a financial crime. Yeah. And I'm not weighing in that one way or another, but I can say, but let me say that if Josh Waits is behind it, it's very questionable. So people shouldn't disbelieve you.
Thank you.
But imagine this. If there is a financial crime, is that person better served paying it back?
Thank you.
Or they're better served being locked up.
And that's where the logic goes. More money.
Right. And that's where the logic goes out. Because if they're not a threat to society, if something was taken from me, I'd much rather get my money back over time than saying, okay, well, they're there. Yep. So, there's a lot of things in the system that these guys brought up.
It has to
and they had a great point. Yep. And I had to put it in a book because I had to write from their perspective, too.
That's amazing.
Remember this. I wasn't sent to a camp. Most politicians, they're usually sent to a camp. I was sent to one of the worst federal prisons, and I was put in the most violent housing unit. And I can't prove it, but I believe it's by design.
And as a former police officer,
absolutely,
you were already at a higher risk of danger going into prison than anyone else.
Absolutely. The unit I was in was so violent, it was referred to as a lion's den. And
and I will tell you, it was by design, just like Judge Ross putting my mother through diesel therapy for weeks on end was by design. By sending her, we requested that she show up to her resentencing hearing via Zoom. She's already in federal prison. This is the resentencing hearing. Why waste taxpayer dollar? This is pretty much a customary thing to be done. Nope, not allowed in. She'll be here in person.
I saw that.
And then not only will she be there in person, but she'll be forced to wear, her prison get up. Wasn't allowed to wear normal clothes. And then she had her picked up, and we were like, all right, well then if that's the case, then let us have a furlough. Or we will pay for an escorted furlough, which can be done in federal prison. You just have to carry the cost of it if you're requesting it, which I was fine doing. So she could be taken from Lexington, Kentucky, straight to Atlanta. Nope, not allowing that to happen. She puts her on a plane to go from, I want to say, Atlanta to Memphis, Memphis to Oklahoma. She was in county jail. Then she was in prison in Oklahoma, behind the fence, it was a 23-1. So in her cell, 23 hours a day, out 1 hour. There were no windows, no nothing. And then on her way back, we asked Judge Ross to allow us to take her back to prison. She's not a flight risk. She showed up to prison the first time. Let us do something other than what happened. And Judge Ross said, isn't this the way everyone gets transported? And as a woman, when we sit here and discuss to you that she was told to not eat or drink, because if she had to go to the bathroom, she'd have to walk to the back of the plane where all the men are shackled, everything. And as a woman, you still proceed to be as heartless as possible, and then sends her back to Oklahoma. It took her, she lost over a month and a half of good time days, which is a month and a half. She would have come home sooner from prison because she wasn't programming under the First Step Act. And yeah, so a month and a half. And then on the way back, she took her to, and I don't care what anyone says, I will say it was all by design. She was taken to a county jail in Oklahoma in Grady County, which is referred to as Shady Grady. And she said it was the most horrendous thing she's ever been in. That I don't even know how the federal government has a contract with this county jail. The water, they didn't even have clean drinking water. They didn't have bottled water. They didn't have anything to drink. It was horrendous.
I'm glad you brought that up. Another thing that bothered me and why I wanted to be here to talk with you and commend you for your fight, commend you for your courage. A lot of people, okay, well, it's jail, it's whatever.
Oh, you deserve it. You deserve to live like animals. You're lying. That's not true. The Bureau of Prisons came out with a statement and said that what you said wasn't true.
Okay, I was there. There was black mold in the bathrooms. It's in the book. It was leaking. The conditions that the men there are living under is not right. They actually, I remember some senators were coming to tour because a complaint was made, and the bathroom was actually boarded up so they couldn't see inside the bathroom when they came. So, right. I guess what I'm trying to say is this, it disturbed me when I see people think that you're just complaining because your family is affluent.
Yeah.
What you're saying is true. I was there. I used to run a jail, and my jail had a reputation for being the cleanest jail in Georgia. Many people say you can eat off the floor. And because that's how it's supposed to be. There's no law that says that a jail has to be filthy.
I say that that's not what the judge sentenced you to. The judge sentenced you to a term of confinement, not a sentence of abuse, terrible sanitary conditions, no health care. Let me just ask you, were you consuming food that said not for human consumption?
I don't know what it said. I know, of because we'll both get teased on
Yeah.
this, because people refer to me as the African American Anthony Bourdain, so they know I enjoy fine dining. So they're going to say, well, anything they gave you was whatever. I get teased a lot about that with the guys back there, but I can tell you this: the food was subpar, and I ran a jail, and they can say what they want about the jail I ran, and people there will tell you the truth. It was clean. It was paramilitary. It was strict. It was ran like a military boot camp, but it was clean. Mm-hmm. And everything we did, regardless of the laws, they said was very humane. The safety restraint here is the most humane way you can restrain a person, especially guys that exhibited the type of violence that these guys did. But, a lot of times the food was cold. It wasn't the best dining experience, and
I know,
and don't
I've
get
had
me
people
wrong.
say there was maggots in beans. There was, I've got photos of all of it, which is crazy, but just food that's expired,
right?
Way past the expiration
I have
date.
seen that.
Yeah,
I did see that. I didn't see maggots, but I did see that.
Yeah, and healthcare, it really is non-existent in the prison system.
The jail, listen, one reason I want to come here today is there are a lot of things that happen, and when people complain about it, people will make it seem as if though you're making it up. You're just crazy. You're not crazy.
Yeah.
What you're saying is true. There's some very, very suspicious things. Just the fact that Josh Waits is a person that initiated this case makes me doubt a lot about it. I don't have all of the details, but just the fact that he's involved, and the fact that I know he was involved in my case, and came up with, you drove your car out of town, so you're now a RICO mob member.
I also think it's pretty interesting that that's what he came up with it, when it pertains to you, but yet he used government funds to buy a new F-150 truck.
Absolutely.
And I'm pretty sure this is the same guy that drove his government vehicle to Nashville to serve papers just because he wanted to be the one to serve them. When what happens? They send it to the sheriff here, and the sheriff serves the papers.
Correct. So that's why I want to reiterate this. I understand the fight you're up against, and I admire you. I admire your bravery. I'll never forget, after that 27-count indictment, or whatever that was that Josh Waits and his cronies came up with, there was a well-known preacher in Clayton County that I was pretty close with. And I was very disappointed with him. Mm-hmm. And I had a conversation with him, and I said, the way you acted as if though you thought I was guilty for real. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, well, all of those charges, I thought you had to do something. And I said, you really believe that? And, during that whole time, and I had to break it down to him, I was charged with, according to them, I stole my police car 3 times in a span of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then stole it 2 more times, the same car. So that meant I stole it, brought it back to myself, stole it, brought it back to myself. The most ridiculous thing. And then they put it under RICO. Then the media knows this. I know they know it because we sent it to them, and they don't say a word. All they say is RICO indictment. So now everybody thinks I'm the new John Gotti of sheriffs, and it's the most ridiculous thing in the world. So, I hope, of course I want people to see my book and buy it. There's a whole lot more in there that people need, but I hope that I can come on here and be an encouragement to you to say, keep up the fight. There are people who see through and know that there's merit to what you're saying. Yep. And there's some very questionable things. And when you look at these charges, you got to not only look at what the charges are, but the origin. How did it come to be? Who started it and why? How did it come? All of a sudden you got these guys, oh my God, he's torturing people. Yeah. Who are these guys?
Yep.
Did they make a complaint? No. Yeah. You got contacted and told you're a victim? Oh, really? I'm a victim? Okay, I'll testify.
Yeah, I could get money. I could get charges dropped.
They
or
never
reduced
came forward and said before that they were injured and they felt pain. So you got to understand that. And a lot of people don't know the backstory. And that's what this book is about, the backstory, the political campaign.
Yep.
The DA that was trying to unseat me in order to get this other guy in. The relationship with the DA and Judge Ross. Yeah. There's a whole lot more to this. And because there's a whole lot more to my case, there's no doubt in my mind that there's a whole lot more to what happened to your family. And that's why I'm here. Yeah. And again, I admire your courage, young lady.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you showing up and doing this and telling your story. And people can go find his book, Vigilante Sheriff, on Amazon.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Perfect.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And let's hope there's no more retaliation due to this interview, but who knows? There probably will be.
Well, it'll be pretty obvious if it does happen.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me.